Teacher here with a weekly episode of a step-by-step on voice series. Today we get to something very vocal specific that sometimes you don't hear talking about anymore because it was some sort of old style of old bel canto jargon language. But it is a concept that I think it's still valuable, still very important. It has a biomechanical sense, even if I don't have the complete answers there, but just hypotheses, because I work into applying functionality and biomechanics to vocal training, just to have more tools and solutions for my clients, and there have been many years of those successful solutions. And here I'm just opening the discussion about those and about what could be intended by what I know better, that is vocal technique and old school of bel canto, and evolved into more contemporary sounds, and some hypotheses, just again because it's nice to bridge. And someone will correct me, and we go on with the knowledge. What are the vocal positions? Why I talk about vocal positions? Do you remember the episode on the larynx when I said that in the article I cited, go to see the episode if you want, we have phonation when we have a subglottal pressure, and this subglottal pressure is maintained higher than the pressure over the glottis, and it is the line of the closure of your vocal folds or vocal cords, depends how you prefer to call them. To study deeper, you will see the difference in between the folds and the cords, but just for simplicity, things of the line in which they close, we have to position the vocal cords to close. With what? Answer of $1,000,000. Partially, certainly, with the work of the intrinsic laryngeal muscles. Partially, with some extrinsic laryngeal muscle, they are going to position higher or lower the larynx. But also, for phonation, we saw that we need an open pharynx, otherwise a collapsed pharynx will not make possible the passage not only of the air but of the sound in some sort. I don't know if it does block the larynx and the vocal folds. I have not studied precisely that. I don't know if there exist studies about that. At my knowledge, no, but I can't study everything, of course. And positions. Okay, intrinsic laryngeal muscles, yeah. Some extrinsic laryngeal muscles, yeah, probably. Some will say also the tongue and the pressure is going to put into the hyoid bone, and the position, as I say, is it a positioning? Yes, of course. There is some studies about of Eleonora Bruni and Franco Fussi on the hyoid bone. I will say what we do with some muscles in the neck would position what? The pharynx. Are we sure it's not also positioning partially or maintaining some positions of the larynx? Could be an hypothesis. In my specificity, the positioning of the other segments of the body. Because as we are starting understanding, in my reasoning, in my presentation at PVOC Pan-European Voice Conference, segments of the body far from vocal tract has a say into voice production. By what? In what I say in my practice, and it's my hypothesis but have results about, is that it corresponds to the positioning of the forces we are using and the positioning in relation to the functions of the muscles into the segments. Okay, not to get too much complicated. if we want a flexion or an extension into the muscles of the larynx, that is the positioning, we will say for simplicity that this has a possibility as an isolated segment, but then if we want to do and to really have a sound, we cannot isolate too much. First, because it is not an isolated system and it will never be. Second, because you will not have enough capacity to do what is required by music. And what is required by music is a conjunction of work into functions opposed in all the segments of the body. Just to be simple, if you want an extension of your larynx, meaning it goes to come with the thyroid muscles pushing and coming, and as Professor Rubin told us, and as it was my idea also, you don't have the vocal folds horizontal. You see that in stroboscopy, but it's a false view from stroboscopy. They come in diagonal. And we want this diagonal. But to have that, if into the body, for example, your plantar arch is pushing down, it will be much more difficult because you can't jump while you sit. Okay? You must have the prevalence of what? According to the styles, the prevalence of the exhalatory muscles will be into the preparation of the system, or it will be directly into the action of the exhalatory muscles. What we see into the practices that make the development of the voice, and that's why I talk about bel canto positions, is that in the first phase we use the exhalatory muscles as predominant and as directly connected to voice production, because we will have as a factor the development of the positions. Why? Because as we can see in the human motion, it is more difficult to gain an extension than a flexion. We come from four-legged and basically flexed to gain the extension. The extension comes from the fully developed exhale muscles, in my view, or with the fully developed action of the, how can I say, acceleration muscles that will extend your joints. There are some joints more important and less important. We can think of positioning and of vocal positions as a higher extended capacity of the system to maintain the balance into the opposing of the forces while there is phonation. While the opposing of the forces, because as I said many times, it is an opposed system, seemed the opposite. What it means? It means that to maintain a position you must have the activation of the agonist and at a certain point the activation of the antagonist that you don't activate by yourself but you call co-activation to maintain the tension or the position of the joint into the desired position that we call functionality, when they are trained and developed enough to be able to function into those positions without injury, without excess of fatigue, and without the incapacity of the system to be resilient, meaning being able to come out from some situations in which you go out of the desired position, but you got into some undesired position, and the capacity of the system to come back into the desired position also is functionality, as the brilliant Eriksson stated. That is why you see that when we develop the voices, we ask to train in a larger extension than what is required by your voice, because the required extension for your repertoire is where you are functional, and you must be able to have some resilience. How you build this resiliency? If you look at knees over toes guy and the work of the loads into the range of motion, you will see that there is a safe range of motion in which you can make the work. Sometimes it is not enough to activate all the functions of the muscles, as we said, by the work of MAV on hip joints, dostal, etc. That I cited again, and I will cite again here. According to the position, it was a study for the hip joints, but we have the idea that it's not only for hip joints, since I don't think that we have different logic of biomechanical way of working of the muscles, specific for the hip joints and completely different from the other joints. It can be a different organization, but usually the biological logic remain mainly the same, or it would be a great surprise to me to discover that it's not exactly the same into system similar as the skeletal muscle system. What I was saying, according to the position, you will have a function of the muscle, a quantity, meaning a ratio of this function, and this function will determine the function of the antagonist during that action. We've seen also that if we want to develop a too small range of motion, as it's very often the case, you start studying, you don't have all the extension and you don't have all the desired characteristics, meaning the complete developed functions for the color, for the dynamics, for the accents, for the rhythm, for the maintaining of the sound and of the volume that is required, and the drive and the accents, or the pianissimo, that again it's even more effort in some sort and strength than the forte or mezzo forte or clear sound. You usually have less. We've seen by the study on eccentric and all the practices as knees over toes guys and Charles Weingroff, I think, that we can develop by stressing the tissues in eccentric, or by the action of the agonist and the coactivation until it gets to the eccentric, stressing a bit with the activity of the agonist, or by the load, that can be done also with the voice, by maintaining longer phrase, for example, and saying some numbers as I made with Alice Robert, and then stressing with the agonist by what, for example, with Alice Robert, putting some notes with a R inside, because it will change the positioning inside and the acceleration and the ratio of agonist and antagonist. Some sort, it's an acceleration inside, very controlled, but it's an acceleration, so that we stress in elongation the antagonist, and this, if it is well done into proper ratio, quantity and intensity, will have the adaptation of the tissues, the favorable adaptation of the tissue. Yeah, we make a small trauma to heal, regenerate and develop, very small. So we start usually the voices with not the correct position. Sometimes we have quite correct position, and today we talk about and we make examples with Freddie Mercury. He starts with absolutely perfect positions. How you see that? He has yet the perfect intonation and pitch, even if not stamina, that he will maintain and he will develop. I will make another example with George Michael. Why? Because he starts with a smaller extension in some sort, smaller perfection into the color. Why? You will see that from when he starts till the second part of the playlist I've made that you find in the description, you will find that when he started, he was not as effective and brilliant in the medium higher part. This is what we call usually lower positions. The lower positions are the one in which you are not fully developed into the functions, as if you were a little flexed and not able to open. You know, when you do yoga, you want to open your hips. How much time it takes? It can take a long time. Why? Because it is not that you force it and get to open. You must adapt all the tissue that has remained a bit, underused, not well, with not enough blood supply, with not enough nourishment to adapt the ligaments. The fascia will be stiffer, less hydrated, and adaptation, I was saying before, to develop that takes some time. Some time that is usually a little longer than you think, but you start feeling and hearing a better sound and a better effectiveness sooner. But the true effects of a good practice of development will take to be effective into the voice and get singing something like nearly immediately, if you want, to obtain the true transition phase and get to full development. It takes some years, 3-5 years. So when we start with Freddie Mercury, I have no idea what he did before. I would like to, but I don't have the time to see if there is material. I studied a bit, but I could not study everything, of course. What we see that basically he had just to develop the voice to become professionally more rich, but to maintain his position. And as you see, I took the playlist that I have here. The first, if you hear the first lie I put it, that is 1975, you will hear that you recognize exactly his sound and the sound that you remember from him. If you put Liar of 1973, you will hear that exactly the starting is not exactly the voice that you remember of Freddie Mercury, because it's not fully developed. But it has not a change into the sense of the intonation and the pitch. It's just the same, with less color, less precision, less stamina inside, and less of this particular timbre and intensity of the voice, the material of what we usually think as Freddie Mercury. Then I put something that is for the third phase, Somebody to Love from Milton Keynes' Bowl, 1982. Why? Because by maintaining this development phase, we have what? That the antagonist part starts coming, and he's one who used a lot what we call the sustain, that is mostly the opposed function of the respiratory muscles that we know can be accessory, and that we know we can activate also with, I'm gonna say, with some other related correlations into the body, because we use them as postural and respiratory at the same time. So we can activate with a postural function, but we have it into the breathing management, as we say in vocal jargon. And what happens, it did mostly with a very good exhale and a very good extended, nearly full extended, and this made first with more stamina, more brilliance, more drive, and then as you start understanding that when you make a functional system and you really work well with it, what you do into the main function will develop also the opposite. The opposite, what it means? It means some velvet. It means some sweetness into the sound. And if you get to 1982, you have his fully developed voice that has, again, even a better sound than before. It has the stamina, but it has a sweetness. Because we start having the activity of the reaction, because it's not all the time pushing just to get more extension. That some can do, but usually they lose some color and they get a bit hysterical into the sound, because you have to develop until you find the co-activations, that is the balanced voice. And I made this example because you can hear in some sort into Freddie Mercury in 1975 something in common with George Michael voice in the second phase. Something in common, okay? George Michael, I did put some more because I'm not sure of what was in playback and what was really live, but, you know, I have no idea there, again. But if you hear the executive, I don't know, should be them, but you can hear from Young Guns 1982, Club Tropicana 1983, Freedom 1984, that his voice from the first two start changing into the medium register to be with more stamina, more color, more drive, more brilliancy. Because he started with lower positions and he was so amazingly intelligent to do actively something to gain the other positions. And it is clear where, for example, Worm, Careless Whisper, 1985, I will put the photo of the moment, the long note, you will feel that it's not so perfectly balanced because he came from not perfect positions, so he had to develop the position and the strength to maintain the positions into the singing, and this has a transitional phase in which you are a little unbalanced, but he's so intelligent that he continues to get toward the desired new true positions, even if it is not perfect there. You hear this also into Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me, Live Aid 1985, not the later one is perfect. And you hear that it's really going out, meaning it's really jumping into maintaining those new positions at my ear. At the Live at Brixton Academy, Wham, 1986 I think, or 1987, I think 1986. And in my understanding, I've heard pieces of this concert. Every time I was hearing, I was saying, he has outgrown them. He's, how can I say, all the time getting to those positions, and those positions have, in the second phase, more drive, more acceleration, more brilliancy, and you have to activate this acceleration more. That's why, for example, Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me 1985, for some reasons it's in a better place than Careless Whisper 1985, because Careless Whisper is not an accelerated song. So he had to manage with the song without betray too much the song. if you hear the Careless Whisper 1991 and you hear the long note on the intro, it's perfectly balanced. Why? Because the system have developed. In what? In the tissue of the fascia and of the muscles, into those different range of motions, if you want, that they give different tensions, and they have to be stressed and maintained. By what? But what is less strainful for the system. So when you activate with the acceleration, you cannot balance, meaning also stabilizing too much, because you will put too much strain into the tissues that you want to adapt, and you will not adapt correctly. That is why we ask for the gesture, but we don't ask for the perfect stabilized sound, and we let a little bit of this imbalance, because we know that while you get to the correct position that you hear, because the voice immediately sounds more correct, better, more yours, and more, how can I say, interesting for the public and for your songs, you cannot maintain it, because you would maintain it out of the functional, because you will not have enough capacity of the system to get away with the undesired position. It will be a strain. And that's why, if you see with knees over toes guys, also we do some things with the pulsing that is exactly as the acceleration. When we can get to the acceleration thing, when you have enough of what? Of the muscular tissue. If you don't have enough of the muscular tissue, you will get to strain the ligaments and the joint. That is why I don't like to work in flexibility but in mobility. And I prefer to do gently and eventually not maintaining the positions, because maintaining the position is the perfect opposite system, in which you will not let the system have enough motion that will give what? The activation, not in isometry but in eccentric, of the opposed, that will balance this acceleration you had given. So when we start that we have really no muscles, the strategy will be different. To do what? To gain enough muscle to start this accelerating process. Then you will see 1988 again, absolutely to me there is getting to the phase of being perfect. 1991 is absolutely perfect. the recap.